Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. Today is a longer video because it's a tutorial on working with digital scrapbooking products and converting them into physical scrapbooking products. So I'm going to use my Cricut to convert these digital embellishments from a Vicky Bouton Warm Wishes scrapbook line into physical products. So let's go ahead and get going with the tutorial. So I already have some of these digital elements loaded into my software, but in case you need a little bit of help with doing that, I go into that upload area of the software and I click browse in my file system and I go to the folder where I have my files stored, and these are all my Vicky Bouton Warm Wishes digital files. I find one of the embellishment folders and then I just kind of start looking through these embellishments to see which ones I want to open. I need to say here that I am using .png graphic files, and that's the most common graphic file for digital scrapbooking embellishments. Now the papers would be JPEGs, and JPEGs are different to work with, so I'm not covering that here. So be sure that your graphic files are .png. That green star is the one I want for this particular tutorial. So I'm going to go ahead and open that and it will show up in my software. Now this is the part of the software that does the work for you, where it will trace it so that it will turn it into a cuttable area. So I'm using that lower area that says complex, and that might take a little bit longer than the other options, but it's a little bit more accurate. And once I have that area open, I'm going to go ahead and hit apply and continue. And then I have a choice here to just cut out the shape or to print and cut the shape. And I definitely want to print that color and pattern. So I'm going to choose that option and hit continue. And now I have that loaded into my software, but it is not in my workspace yet. So I need to go ahead and add it to my canvas by clicking on it and then hit the add to canvas button. Now you see it comes in really big, so I don't want this element to be really big, and that's one of the benefits of digital or hybrid layouts, is that you can resize the elements to what you want them to be. Now on this other part of my canvas, I'm already working on an area where I'm going to create the printable part of this file, and I have some elements already on there. So I'm going to resize that star to fit on that area that I have created, and I will cover that in just a moment on how to do that. So I'm going to make this star quite a bit smaller so that it will fit on my canvas area, or on my printable area. So that gray box is just a holding space. Nothing's going to print or cut in that shape. That is just the correct size holding space. And this gray box is 6.75 inches wide by 9.25 inches tall, and I created it just by using the shapes generator in the Cricut software to create a square, and then I resized that square up here in the sizing zones. You need to make sure that your little lock button is unlocked so that you can size the height and the width to different sizes. And that particular size is just based on the Cricut's print area that it allows. So there's nothing magical about that. It's just a number to use. And if you use that, you'll maximize how much space you have on your paper to print elements. So when I have this zone created, I'm going to send it to the back with this layering option so that it will be behind all of the other pieces. And as long as all my other pieces fit onto that gray square, they will then physically fit onto my printed paper that I can use to send to my Cricut to cut out all these printed elements. So that is why that square, and that is why all of these elements have to fit onto that square. Now this step does take a little bit of time. It is a little fussy to find all the pieces that you want, to load them all into the Cricut, to scan them to turn them into print and cuts, and then to arrange all these pieces onto this area so that they can physically print out. However, once you have done this once, you can save this file and reuse it over and over again. You can add bits to it, delete bits from it as you see fit. So that is one of the benefits of using these digital kits. So I'm just going to continue filling up this gray box with all of the elements that I want to print for a project that I've wanted to work on, and I do have a layout process video using these elements already, so I will put a link up on the screen and also in the show notes so that if you're interested in seeing the process video using these elements, you can get to that. In order to make the software run a little bit faster, I'm going to group all of these other elements together, and that allows me to easily hide them all at once by clicking that eyeball icon. And so when the software doesn't have to think about showing all that stuff on the screen, it can run faster, and that's going to make other steps of your process smoother. Okay, for this section, I'm just going to kind of go faster through this whole process as I rotate and place these images on different parts of my little canvas that I've created. I'm going to move things around and resize them, rotate them, trying to fit as much as I can possibly fit on this area. Now, I do need to leave a little space in between these elements for the machine to have some room to move its blade and do the cutting. So you don't want these like touching each other. You do need a little bit of a gap when you lay this out. And this is just like a puzzle, and you kind of lay out the pieces until you can get as much stuff on there as you possibly can, and that will save time and resources when you get to the physical printing part. Okay, we're going to go back to real time here so that we can make sure we don't gloss over an important step in this process. So my screen is having a hard time showing all those bits and pieces, so I just kind of scrolled around to get it to show up. So the next step in this, I saved it so that I don't lose my progress. I'm going to go ahead and shut off that square. I don't want to delete it because I want to save that square in case I want to work on more of this in the future. I select all of those elements together and I group them again, and then down at the bottom of the screen I'm also going to attach them, and those are important steps so that the Cricut knows that this is all one lump of information that needs to stay in those shapes, sizes, and positions for future steps. Now I go ahead and click the Make It step. And because I've already imported these graphics as print and then cut graphics, it knows to put them onto a printer size piece of paper. And then I'm going to go ahead and continue. And when I hit continue, the first step it has me do is send this file to my printer. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure the number of copies that I want and the printer that I want is selected. This auto bleed option there is automatically turned on, and there are pros and cons to leaving that on and turning it off, and I will show you kind of how each one looks, and I'm also going to show you a problem that I encountered with my Cricut, and I will send you off to a resource on how to resolve that problem. So now I'm sending this file to my printer, and this step can take a little bit of time. My computer is older and a little bit slower, so it does take some time. But once it's done thinking, it will move you to this screen where now you have the settings to select for the actual cutting part. And so I like to choose the heavy cardstock setting, and I have that setting saved here in my favorite materials section. I do print this on a cardstock weight paper. I use the Epson matte presentation paper, and I'll leave a link for that for you. And then when I get into the cut settings, I do choose more because I find that that makes a smoother cut through a cardstock weight paper. Here is what my paper looks like when it comes out of my printer. It has this black border all the way around, and you can see that I have all of my elements printed out, and they look pretty good compared to what you can see on the screen. Now the gold stars aren't quite as shiny as they look on the screen, and that's going to depend totally on your printer and how it evaluates those ink colors. So I'm going to put this paper on my Cricut mat, and you should make sure that your paper is positioned in the upper left corner of your mat because the Cricut is going to be able to read it better from that spot. And as I was rubbing it down, I realized that there was a little bit of fuzz left over from previous projects, so I want to make sure that my mat is nice and clean. So I'm just kind of scraping away with my fingernail those little bits of paper that were left over from previous projects so that I will get nice clean cuts. And then I'm going to load that into my Cricut machine, and I will go ahead and hit the go button on my Cricut, and that will bring me to this screen on my computer that will give me a countdown of progress that it's making towards actually cutting. And then it will show me this little button down here in the corner that says that I am finished with this project. So I click that and I am done with the software part of this project. We are back in the physical world, and this is what my project looks like when it was all cut out. Now, some of these elements you can still see there's a tiny bit of white border around the edge, and that's where I encountered the problem with my Cricut, and I will talk a little bit more about that with you later. But the first step I take to try solving that problem is using that bleed setting in the software. So here it was printed out after I tried that bleed setting, and see how those pieces now touch? Because that bleed setting kind of stretches the image a little bit to make more room for the cutting blade to have more color to cut into, so there's less room for error. But when I cut it out, there was still a little bit of white showing. So that made me think that my Cricut machine is not calibrated correctly for print and cut settings. And that is something that you do need to make sure your machine has correct. So I'm going to leave you a link to the Cricut website on how to calibrate your machine, and you should really take those steps before you attempt the print and cut file so that you know that everything is working as well as it should be. Cricut does a good job at doing that tutorial, so I'm not going to repeat that here. So once I had my machine calibrated, I did do another run of printing and cutting, and these pieces came out much more smooth. As I take them off the mat, you can see that there's far less white space around some of those colored elements. Now, I was going for another print run with and without the bleed turned on and off so that you could see the difference, but my printer ran out of ink and I ended up with these autumnal colored elements now that I'm going to stick in my file for later before I move on with these Christmas elements. At any rate, you can see these two pieces were cut before and after I did that calibration, and you can see how the one on the left has a much more even border to it. And I'm going to pull out a couple more pieces so you can see the difference. That first one was without bleed, the second one was with bleed, and then my third one down there was without bleed, but my machine had been calibrated, so it was much more accurate at that point in time. So that ends the tutorial for how to turn your PNG graphic files into physical print and cut materials. I do have a layout process video using those materials to create a hybrid scrapbook layout, and I will leave you links if you're interested in seeing that. Thanks for watching, and if you found something helpful in this video, I do appreciate a like. I hope you'll join me again in the future for more videos.